No, tak nic řekl.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Today I would like to welcome a special guest who is being here with Shuspa Yambach at the botanical department, and because he's around and he's here at the sabbatical, then we decided to have some special seminar like that during the summer, which resulted to the few people who are here. But I would like to give the space to St.Clair from the Brigham Young University. So he flew all the way from America yesterday. Yesterday. Yeah, you have arrived yesterday, right?
No, I've been here for about 5 weeks.
Oh, okay.
I look worse than I'm already.
Okay, I put it because in the email it was written that we will be arriving here. So yeah, sorry for just letting go there. And he will be talking about the drought and stuff related to the community ecology and the drought.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, I did get here yesterday from Bayreuth University in Germany, where one of my former graduate students is a postdoc. So I spent some time with him, and as part of my postdoc, I'm visiting field sites in Africa and Europe, but I'm also developing a grant proposal. You guys know how grant proposals are, very competitive, very hard to get. And so as part of my sabbatical, I decided I wanted to visit some of the best plant ecology labs in Europe. And so, of course, I wanted to visit Shushpa in his lab and just get to talk to really good ecologists. So I've been in the Netherlands, I've been in France, I was in Germany. And so what I'm doing is I'm sharing ecology from the part of the world that is very different than here. We're going to a place that's much drier than the systems you work in. I know Shushpa works in very wet systems, mesic systems. I am a plant community ecologist, so my main interest is the assembly of plant communities and invasion. I tell my students, we don't study species, we don't study places, we study processes. And I'm sure that even though the systems are different, the processes are very similar that I'll talk about. And so I think it'll be interesting for you to see processes that you're interested in just in a very different system. And I just want to thank Shushpa for his hospitality. I've visited several scientists that are very, very good, well-respected scientists, and just the nicest people in the world too, and just so accommodating and generous in welcoming me and sharing their thoughts and expertise with me. So thank you very much. I had an opportunity to read some comments from former students, and it was so inspiring to see how much he had inspired his students. And with where I'm at in my career, I'm really thinking about the things that can have the most impact moving forward. And I've realized what matters is people and relationships, and that what I can give my time to is helping young people succeed. And as I read those comments, I thought, this is someone that has done high-level science, but didn't lose a focus from the fact that what really matters is people. And when you love people and take care of them, they can also succeed in science. And I've seen a lot of people not succeed in science because the environment they are in were so toxic. And so I spent a lot of time at lunch asking about how he's created his lab culture and had that kind of influence. And I really appreciated what he shared with me. So yeah, this is one of the driest places on Earth. Maybe you've heard of Death Valley, which is maybe the hottest, driest place on Earth. It's in the Mojave Desert. You can see we're doing experimental burns there in the background. Let's see if I can find the laser pointer. That's actually a Joshua tree on fire. Its leaves hold a lot of volatile oils. So when you light this tree on fire, it's explosive and it sends embers all over the place. So we have to be very careful not to spread fires when we do these experimental burns in our study system. And I just want to point out that there are I've been very fortunate to have amazing students that have done a lot of this work. So I want them to be represented in it as well. As I was reading some of these comments, this really struck me, and it really motivates the work I do as well. Maybe the most important ecological lesson for Arisen is that correct answers to ecological questions take time. So much of our funding is on 4 to 5 year timeframes, and we don't get enough of these long-term data sets to actually figure out what are the most important relationships in the systems. And it's very true for the study system I'm going to show you. It's not until year 10 or 11 or 12 that we've seen the most important insights emerge from our studies. So I also am a big believer in let's do long-term research to really understand what's important in these systems. So I'll be talking about native species, but also invaders in the system. And I always use this framework to understand plant community assembly. It's after Lamber's. So you have species, a potential species pool, and then you have the realized species pools. And there's 3 filters that really matter. There's a dispersal filter, which are there seeds or propagules that arrive in a location? If they don't, then you can't have a species that establishes there. An abiotic filter, can it germinate, grow, survive, reproduce, water availability, temperature, these abiotic factors. And then the biotic filters, can it successfully compete against other plants and defend itself from enemies, pathogens, herbivores, and can it interact appropriately with pollinators so that and seed dispersers so its reproduction can be successful. For the first part of my career, I focused a lot on this filter right here. And then through just the circumstances of science and conversations you have, I came to realize that if I really wanted to understand my study systems, I needed to invest more time in this biotic filter. And so most of my talk is going to focus on the biotic filter, but there'll also be some abiotic factors I'm looking at. And you can, again, this is the distribution of a species called sagebrush, which is a shrub that's very important in the desert ecosystems of North America. You can see how widespread it is. You can see how successful it's been at working through those filters in its establishment. And I want to use a similar theoretical framework as a unifying theory for invasion. And this is from Jane Catford's 2008 paper, in which she said, hey, there's so many theories on invasion. Maybe we can consolidate some of these theories to simplify it a little bit. And what you'll notice is she basically comes up with the same 3 filters. Right? There's propagule pressure, the propagule hypothesis, abiotic conditions, and I'm going to put this into the category of the resource hypothesis. And so we'll specifically be looking at the effects of fire and climate on resource availability, and then biotic conditions. And this is going to specifically focus on the biotic resistance hypothesis, that native organisms create competition, and then through herbivory, can suppress invasion, or if the native community is compromised in some kind of way, it can open up opportunities, niche opportunities for invasion to be successful. And so this is from Jane's paper. So we got propagule pressure, abiotic forces and biotic forces, and of course they interact kind of in this Venn diagram. She also points out that human activities have a huge impact on what's going on. And then I've added this in, which is that these effects are not static in time or space. They're highly variable. And so this just represents that over time and space, what's going on here can really change based on human effects. So I'm calling this the niche opportunity hypothesis, which says that resource availability and biotic interactions fluctuate in space and time due to both natural processes and human impacts. And if we want to understand plant community assembly in a changing world and invasion, patterns of invasion, then we really need to incorporate all of this thinking. This is the theoretical framework that I'm using in the development of this grant proposal. And here is a distribution of an invasive grass that has been hugely problematic in North America. And it was introduced from Eurasia, and it's just spread. Its niche, realized niche is really impressive. And especially where I live, it is just taken over. So I'm really interested in long-term data sets, and I'm really interested in large spatial inference. So most of the data I'm going to show you is from the Great Basin. It's a semi-arid desert, and the Mojave Desert, which is a hyper-arid hot desert. So they contrast. These are the extremes. This is a very cold, wet desert, and this is a very dry, hot desert. And this project proposes to extend what we're doing here into the broader dryland ecosystems of North America. So the dominant vegetation, native vegetation in the Great Basin is the sea of sagebrush. It dominates this semi-arid cold desert. And then the Mojave Desert is much more diverse. A lot of native shrubs, forbs, and grasses. And the most iconic is this Joshua tree, which I talked about a little bit earlier. And when people think of the Mojave Desert, they think of this tree species right here. Okay, so there are common among all of these deserts are some human impacts that are fundamentally changing the conditions across all 5 of these deserts. Okay? One of them is we're changing and creating novel fire regimes that did not exist historically. And this is kind of the core range where we got native shrubs, native forbs, native grasses, high biodiversity. And because of too much fire, because of the introduction of these invasive annual grasses that create really flammable fuel loads during the hot summer when we get lightning, we're getting a lot more fires in the low elevation ranges of these deserts. And they're spreading up even into the core ranges. And this is creating invasive grass fire cycles. At the upper elevation of these deserts, we're getting woody expansion and infill. We're getting forests where we didn't have them before. And they are moving downslope into the core range. So these are state transitions, and I'm interested in both of them. And all 5 of our deserts are experiencing both of these. And the data I'm going to show you documents that now there are interactions in which there's facilitation between the woody trees and the invasive annual grasses, in which they are facilitating each other's negative ecological effects. And I'll talk about that in more detail. So some key species are rodents. In my desert research, there's always a thing with consumers. As a plant biologist, early on in my career, I would have only told you that the only thing that matters is plant productivity and diversity, right? Plants create the habitat, they create food sources, and structure everything in the food web up from there. Of course, that's a very ignorant statement because we know there are huge top-down effects by consumers in the food web that can create cascading effects. And these are ecosystem engineers, I now know. If you don't account for these little furry critters that no one ever sees because they're nocturnal and they only come out at night, you will not understand these systems and where they're headed. You've got to pay attention to them. And then key plant species, here are the invasive grasses, Bromus tectorum, cheatgrass, that dominates in the Great Basin Desert, the high elevation cool desert. And this is Bromus rubens. They're very closely related, both introduced from Eurasia. And this dominates in the Sonoran and the Mojave Desert. And ecologically, they're having the same effect. They expand prolifically. They create continuous fine fuel loads. They become very flammable, and they're creating a lot more fire in our desert ecosystems. And then we got the catclaw acacia, which I'll show some data on, that is actually native, but expanding and changing the ecology of our system. So it's kind of a native invasive. That's not the correct term, but you can think of it that way. So let me just give you kind of a conceptual model of what's happening in terms of invasive grass fire cycles. In the mid-1800s, through several processes, seeds from Eurasia were transported over into our North American desert ecosystems. You can see in their native condition, they can't carry fire because the native shrubs are spaced out in the landscape because of soil resource limitation. So if you get a lightning strike, that tree will start on fire, but it's very hard for fires to spread. So it's thought that the fire return interval in these systems is more than 400 or 500 years. And fires tended to be very small in these ecosystems. But you introduce invasive grasses, they fill in these shrub interspaces, as I'll show you. I know you could go from a 400, 500-year shrub fire regime to an invasive grass-dominated ecosystem that fills in these shrub spaces. It creates continuous fuels, and then you can create an invasive grass fire regime and fire return intervals every 5 or 10 years, or historically, they're every 400 to 500 years. So dramatic change in not just the frequency, but also the size of these fires. We fundamentally, these are novel fire regimes. These did not exist historically. Now you can carry fire in the system, and this is what it looks like when there's a lightning strike. Here's the native shrub community. Here were the shrub interspaces that didn't have fuels at all historically. Here are the invasive grasses, and you can see they're carrying the flames from shrub to shrub and burning very large areas. And here's just some numbers, the spread of non-native annual invasive grasses in Western North America. And you can see that the doubling time is just, it's really incredible how fast these are spreading. And annual grasses, based on work from Bradley et al., the estimates are double the risk of wildfire. So again, you can see that the fine fuels, they dry out in midsummer, and this is very prone to burning. So here's a fire map from 2000 to 2009. You can see all the fires that happened during that decade. Across, again, this is where I live over here in Utah, Nevada, Idaho, and this is getting up into Washington. So this is the Great Basin Desert down into the Mojave Desert. These are the areas I'm going to be talking about. And this is a fire map that historically would have been a 400 to 500 year fire map. If you mapped all the fires over 500 years, it would have looked something like this. But this is now a decade fire map. We're seeing, again, fires that are happening much more frequently, and these fires are much bigger than we've ever seen historically. Why does this matter? People ask me, like, why does it matter if the desert's burning? Why does it matter that there are invasives in the system? I just want to give you one case study of why we care about this. This is called the Milford Flat Fire, right there. And it's experienced invasive grasses and woody encroachment. It's changed the fuel structure in the system. And this is a 150,000 hectare fire. And if you burn this vegetation, then you don't have the roots and the soil crust stitching the soil in place. And every spring we have really strong wind events that come from the west. This is satellite imagery. So here is that fire I just showed you. There's a fire scar. Here is where all the people, this is the urban area right up here. And if you are going to support human life and societies in here, the important thing to know about is this. This is what provides the opportunity for 2 million people to live in these valleys right here. It's the mountains and the snowpack. That's where our water supply comes from. About 90% of our water comes from this snow right here. So let me show you, when you get these spring winds, it creates plumes of dust that pick up the disturbed soil, right, from the fire scar. And the satellite imagery shows you these pink dust clouds, these plumes. And I live, this is the Great Salt Lake. Here is Utah Lake, and this is where I live right here. And I live right next to the mountains. So here is all our snowpack right here. And if you have asthma, if you have respiratory problems, then when these dust storms come in, you're going to go to the emergency room. There's been a lot of research showing that these dust plumes cause spikes in visits to emergency rooms. But the other thing is when this dust blows past our valleys, it settles on the snowpack in the mountains. And when you darken the surface of the snow, it doesn't reflect the sunlight, it absorbs it. And it melts the snow much quicker, and we're less able to capture that water in our reservoir systems, and we have less water to use in our municipal areas. So this is what we call snert, and it's becoming more common with desert fires.
So that darker color is not snow, it's dust.
That's dust.
Like,
That's from the dust storms. This is desert dust from my research plots. Yeah, or fires that burn. This is not normal. I'm a skier. I love to ski, and I don't like skiing on that. No, usually when you go skiing, it's very white, and you can sunburn very easily. You do not get sunburned as easily on this snow right here because it gets absorbed, not reflected. Okay, let's get into some science here. So here is a burn boundary of these big fires that have been happening. This is unburned native vegetation. You can see the structure and the composition of the plant community. And this fire occurred about 2 to 3 years earlier, and now it's full of invasive species. But it's only 2 or 3 years, right? And we just talked about if we really want to understand these systems, then we can't do just 2 to 3 years of science. We need to do long-term experiments. So we're really interested in vegetation transitions, ecological transitions in dryland ecosystems. And of course, we use this threshold theory in which you have 2 regime types. And of course, you get perturbations. These perturbations are becoming more serious as human activities intensify them, droughts, fires, introduction of invasive species. And if there's resilience in the system, you don't push it past the threshold, then it's resilient and it comes back. And the coming back may take time, could push it to the tip right here. This right here could be right here, and it's just going to fall back down because the system's resilient. We don't know yet. Or it could be pushing into a new regime type, right? A state conversion that then is more permanent. So my grant proposal is really based on this theory. So we have initial plant communities, right, that we call native communities, and then we have these altered plant communities. Are these type conversions? Are these state changes? We still don't know. But here are the variables that we think are really important to understand to know where we're headed in these systems. The first is fire. The second is precipitation, drought. We think these are the tipping factors that really matter. If you don't understand what's happening and you don't project and model where we're headed in terms of where fire and precipitation is going to land, then we're not going to be able to predict accurately where we're headed. And much to my surprise, as a plant community ecologist, the consumers, the rodents really matter, as I'll show you in just a minute. So we're really interested in the interactions that explain this. And of course, it's not just one fire at one place in time. We're really interested in these spatiotemporal fluctuations and resource availability, biotic resistance, and these niche opportunities that are created as a result of this. So the first story I want to tell you about is state transition number 1. The potential conversion of native shrublands into invasive grass fire cycles that reinforce and promote invasion over and over and over again, right? And is this a permanent tip? When we get back, where are these systems headed and what are the implications? Both for the ecology of the system and for human societies that live near them. Increasingly, we were having more and more fires spread into urban areas, into neighborhoods, and burn houses down. So this is a real thing. I love practicing science by being out in the systems that I study. I love making observations. So I just want to show you some observations that led to these experiments. This is just a native biological community, right? You got the native shrubs, you got these really beautiful soil crusts that are full of microorganisms that cycle the nutrients. There are nitrogen fixers, nitrogen fixing bacteria that bring nitrogen into the system. And then you have this whole community of pollinators, and I've had to draw them in because they're nocturnal, these native rodent consumers that are really important. And we don't see any invasive species in the system, right? I know exactly what cheatgrass looks like. There's no cheatgrass that I can see. So when we started this experiment, we started it in a completely native condition in 2011. And what really drove this experiment was a couple of follow-up observations that I made, in which I noticed spots of invasion within this landscape. And as I looked more closely, I noticed that it was happening in areas where a drought had killed the sagebrush, which made me think, okay, the native shrubs must be creating biotic resistance, probably through competition, that really does an effective job of keeping these invasives out of the system. And then we also started a series of experiments where we noticed the capacity of these rodent communities to consume seeds and seedlings. So we knew they were eating seeds. We didn't have a good sense of how, so they don't drink water. They get their water from eating seedlings. And we went out and documented and found that these rodents at night are consuming a tremendous number of seeds and seedlings during the night. And we would take seeds and we would put them in soil and petri dishes and just spread them all over. And what we found, we'd come back and they would find almost all the seeds and they would just disappear. We didn't know the fate of those seeds, but we knew that through smell, these rodent communities are very effective at finding any seeds they're interested in and consuming them. So we began and wanted to do an experimental test of the biotic resistance hypothesis to invasion. So what we did, we went out into these pristine, uninvaded shrublands, native plants, native consumers, and we removed the biotic resistance and the competition from the native plant community through fire. Now, fire doesn't just remove native plants, it does a lot of other things. So we can talk about that a little bit later. And then we removed the biotic resistance, so we burned in our experimental plots. And then we removed the biotic resistance of the native consumer community with rodent fences. And we did this in a full factorial design and looked at how does fire and rodent exclusion in a full factorial design experiment influence the opportunity for invasion. So we went out with a ditch witch and we trenched our soils. We put rodent fences in so they couldn't get in. The rodent access plots, we had fences, we just put holes in the fences so they could go in and out. And then we contacted the BLM and they were very helpful. They came out. No, it was uninvaded, so there were spaces between the shrubs. So we actually couldn't get the plots to burn unless we put fuel in between the shrubs. So we went out and got straw, spread straw between the shrubs, and then we could get the plots to burn. These would hit 10, 15 meter flame length. It just, I'm probably 25, 30 meters from the fire, and then my face felt like it was melting off. It's very, very intense. And this is what the burn plots look like after the burns. We also put rain out shelters to look at the effects of drought and precipitation timing as subplots within our experimental plots. So we're looking at rodent exclusion, fire, and manipulating precipitation. And then I had a friend that had a Cessna plane, and I got my dad's camera. We flew over the plots and I took pictures. This is what it looks like from the sky. So a full factorial design, burned and unburned, rodent excluded or rodent access in 5 experimental blocks. And we did this in the Great Basin. So here are Great Basin plots. And then we did an identical experimental design down in the Mojave Desert. So this is the hot hyper-arid desert. This is the cold semi-arid desert. And this is what the data looks like 4 years later from space, from a satellite image. So you can pretty clearly see which plots got burned and which ones did not. These are the unburned, right here. These are the burn plots. And you can also clearly see from satellite imagery which ones had rodent access and which ones excluded rodents. So you can see in one plot, burn plot, in every block, there's a plot that's darker. You see that? Clearly from space. It's not very often you can see data from a satellite image. No, it's so clear. But this is what it looks like from a drone, much closer. So these dark spaces are these plots right here. You can see it right here. See how that's dark? That's dark. This one is not. This one is not. So these are the rodent exclusion plots. This is where we remove the native vegetation with a fire and where we kept the rodents out. Rodents consumers cannot get in. And what we created is a biological invasion. This is cheatgrass. And we don't get cheatgrass in our rodent exclusion plots, or rodent access plots, sorry. And here's what it looks like graphically. So this is Bromus tectorum, 2012, we had no invasion. We started without invasion. And if you don't burn the top plots, there's no invasion. If you burn the plots, but there are holes in the fence and the consumers can get in, there's no invasion. But if you burn the plots and keep the rodents out, you get 1,300 cheatgrass plants per meter square. It's a carpet of cheatgrass in 4 years. So the important point is if you have a healthy rodent population in the landscape and it gets burned, it's not going to invade. It takes a combination of a fire and loss of rodent abundance and diversity to actually prime and create the invasion. So here's the same data, just represented a little differently. Here's Bromus tectorum, unburned, no invasion. Burned rodents present, no invasion. Burned rodents excluded, invasion. And there was another invasive species that showed the same pattern. So we had multiple invasive species in which rodents are suppressing invasion forward. And when we looked at the effects of fire, we saw that there were two effects. So rodents remove the native shrubs, causing competition release that primes invasion. But we also see in burn plots that rodents emigrate away from burn plots. So the abundance, richness, and diversity of rodent communities drops in half in burned areas. And it's because they don't like predators and they use shrubs to hide themselves from predators. So if you burn the native shrubs, then the rodents leave. And I just showed you the rodents are really important in terms of suppressing invasion. So fire has a double effect. It removes the native shrubs that create competition against the invasives, and it causes immigration of the native rodent community that also contributes to invasion. And when you get red brome densities of 1,300 red bromes plants per meter squared, you lose your native plant diversity. It just plummets. You end up with one or two species. One of them is cheatgrass. It just outcompetes everything else. Okay, so that's state transition number 2 is woody encroachment and infill. And again, we're really interested in, hey, if you change the system, can it create an alternative state where we now transition from a native shrubland to a woody forest, essentially. And this species is the cat claw acacia, which grows down in the washes near our research sites. But we have never seen this species growing in the native shrublands on the plateaus. We've never seen it there. Until about 10 years into our experiment, and again, this is 10 years after the experiment started, we started to notice this species establishing, but only in our experimental plots, and only under one treatment condition. Burned, rodents excluded. The same pattern we see for the invasive annual grasses. So in unburned plots, we don't see cat claw acacia establishing. In burned plots where rodents can get in, we see very low densities of cat claw acacia. It's really when we burn it, we remove the native plant community, and we exclude the rodents, that all of a sudden we've got 7 or 8 acacia trees in a 30 by 30 meter area. And that doesn't really matter ecologically until these trees get big. And our projections are that in the next 7 or 8 years, these trees are going to get big enough that their canopy will cover the entire experimental plot. Now we don't have an invasive or a native shrubland, we have a forest in our experimental plots, right? So we have a state transition to an ecological condition that at least in the short term is very different than what we've ever had in this location. The other thing I want to point out is look in the understory of these acacias. It is 100% invasive annual grasses. And the densities here are twice as high as we see anywhere else in the landscape. They grow taller. And so we're feeling like there may be a facilitation effect in which the invasive annuals suppress to a certain degree the competition of the native vegetation. And then there's kind of niche partitioning between the native invasives that allow this tree to get established. And then as it establishes and forms a canopy, it changes light and understory conditions that favors the invasive annual grass. We don't find any native species underneath these canopies. Okay. So what are some of the mechanisms by which rodents are doing this? This is just in our experimental plots. We took petri dishes with sand or soil, and then we put different species. So this is Joshua tree seeds. We had black brush seeds. We had native seeds, invasive seeds, and we put them in our experimental plots. And then we collected them over a 2-week period. This is rodent excluded plots, and this is data for rodent access plots. And you can see that there's no burn effect. Fire did not affect how many seeds were being removed, but there was a huge fence effect. So that within even a couple of days, rodents were removing, this is all species of plant seeds, removing about 65 to 70% of the seeds in only a few days, when we averaged it across species. But their preference for different species was very, very different too. They did not like amdu seeds, which is a native shrub, and they loved Cora and Joshua tree seeds. These disappeared the same night we put them out. We could not hide these from the rodents for more than 24 hours. They would just disappear. And then here is cheatgrass, here's Bromus rubens. So here are the 2 non-native invasive grasses right here, and they like them. They consume a lot of those invasive seeds. And when we look at the percent of seeds remaining of native and non-native species in excluded rodent access plots and burned versus this is non-native native, we see that rodents are removing just as many non-native invasive seeds as they are native seeds. And that's going to become really important at the end of this story. And of course, I've already showed you that when you exclude rodents, or rodents have access, you don't get invasion. So this was not surprising to us. We knew they were probably eating a lot of invasive species, and that's how they were controlling them. We also were really interested, we knew that they ate seedlings as well, not just seeds. And so we went out and we did another feeding trial, cafeteria trial. We said, do they have a preference for native seedlings versus non-native seedlings? And we saw a big difference here. What we found is non-natives seedlings, they did not touch. They did not like non-native seedlings. If it was a non-native grass, they didn't touch it. Native seedlings, they ate a lot more native seedlings. You can see, and there's not a really strong fire effect here, and there is a significant rodent effect. Okay, so here's the final ecological effect that is really driving my sabbatical. We are seeing that rodents are not only having top-down effects on plant community assembly, they're modifying soil chemistry. So here's some data. We're looking at nitrate and phosphorus concentrations in our soils in our experimental plots. Here's unburned and burned. White is rodent excluded, dark is rodents present. And in unburned areas, we see there's a fire effect. So fire increases nitrate and phosphorus in our experimental plots. And then there's an interaction effect in which in burned areas, if rodents are present, you double again soil nitrate and phosphorus concentrations. And 15 years ago, if you would have told me that rodents can control soil resource pools, I would have said you're crazy. I just would not have believed that. My whole thinking was the abiotic factors, temperature, precipitation, organic matter, drive nutrient cycling processes among microbial communities that determine these pools. And I would not have thought at all that furry little night creatures could have these huge top-down effects in which soil resource pools can be explained by the presence or absence of rodents. We have archived soil samples from our experimental plots over time. So before we imposed the treatments in 2011, we collected soils from the plots. We collected soils again 1 week after, 4 months after, and then every year after through 2016. And now we're collecting them every 5 years. And we haven't started analyzing these archive soils Yeah, but once we went out and collected soils in 2021, we did a bulk analysis and started seeing these results. And I'm just showing you the data for nitrate and phosphorus. We saw other soil variables changing in response to rodents and fire as well. So we know this is a pretty robust thing that's going on. So part of the grant proposal is proposing to do an in-depth analysis on these archived soil samples from our long-term experimental plots. How much time do we got?
47.
40. Maybe I'll skip this. I'll just share really quickly what's going on. Here are the 2005 fires. Most of the fires happened in a single year in 2005. We were really interested in why 2005. This is NDVI data. And you can see here's the green up in 2005 that triggered the 2005 fires. We've had other green up years that also led to fires in the system. So more fuel, more fire. But this was an especially big fire year. And as we looked at the precipitation record, we found an anomaly. We saw this peak of precipitation. And if you look at the dates, what is unique or anomalous about this is a fall precipitation pulse. All of these other big pulses happen in the winter. So one of the projections of climate change is we're going to be getting more intense fall precipitation events. These invasive grasses are winter annuals, so they grow. They can germinate in the late fall and overwinter and grow. And if they germinate at the beginning of fall, they can grow a lot and get a head start. And then by the following spring, you've got really huge fuel loads of these plants. So here's just 2004, March of 2004. Here's the NDVI image. Here's March 2006, and here's March 2005. So you can see how much the landscape greened up in response to that early fall precipitation event that we had in 2004. And that created the fuel that resulted in these huge fires in our experiment. So we recreated this precipitation pattern experimentally. We went out, and here was the 2004-2005 precipitation pattern. And we replicated it. Here's normally when the precipitation starts in late December, early January. And so we had an experimental tradition of early fall precipitation. And then a month later, we started our controls. And you notice we provided the same amount of water. We just offset the timing of when we provided that water to our soil cores. And here are the results right here. When you water them just a month earlier, you get prolific growth and seed production. And people that were out there in 2005 said the red brome was up to their knees, and it was just the fuel load on that landscape was massive. So we're really interested now in the resilience of, now that we're 15, 16 years into the study, we're starting to see native shrubs and native forbs come back into the system. We think that they're much more resilient than the literature was suggesting, simply because we've waited long enough to look. My daughter Grace, and we're seeing at the base of dead Joshua trees, new Joshua trees sprouting up. We're seeing these forbs come up, yuccas. This is an experiment that we published showing that, yeah, about 7 or 8 years after the fire, at the base of dead Joshua trees, we got new Joshua trees starting to come up. They're resprouting. In 2016, we split the burn plots and we reburned them. So we have once burned and reburned plots to mimic the invasive grass fire cycle, right? Higher fire frequency. And even in reburn, we're starting to see recovery of shrub density and species richness of the native community. So you can see these native shrubs are starting to pop back into our plots. We are not seeing this. That's in the Mojave. In the Great Basin, we are seeing no plant recovery of the natives. It is still invaded, and the only species we see is a perennial native grass called Elamus elamoides. And when I showed this at Leiden University, they were really interested because they do a lot of plant microbial interactions. And when they saw this halo around the species, they're like, this is associated with bacteria that is probably allowing them to coexist with cheatgrass. So what are our management strategies? What can we do about this? Well, we know that rodents consume a lot of invasive seeds. to the point that they can suppress invasions. And so what we've been doing is we've been using seed coating technology, where we take native seeds that we spent millions of dollars putting out on landscapes unprotected, and we're coating them with charcoal. So we can then use herbicides to kill the non-natives, and the charcoal will absorb the herbicide and protect the native species. And the other thing we're doing is we're putting ghost pepper powder to create native hot seeds to keep the rodents from eating the native seeds that we package. And then that puts more seed pressure on the non-natives. And we've gotten very good results. When you coat them with ghost pepper powder, the rodents leave them alone really quickly. So I'll end with this. This is my current conceptual model that is being modified as I go and talk to these different research groups and get feedback. So I'm really interested in your feedback and the insights or thoughts that you have. We know that these rodent consumers through herbivory and seed dispersal are creating trophic cascade that have huge impacts on vegetation states. And most of the data is showing that native rodents promote this reestablishment of native shrubs, partially by consuming non-native grasses and woody species that are encroaching. So having robust consumer communities in the system is really important. We need to manage for that. We know that changing fire regimes and drought and changing precipitation patterns influence the consumer communities and also the plant communities. So the proposal is really looking at experimentally controlling these variables, and also at the landscape scale using remote sensing and I have a collaborator that's doing a lot of modeling work, looking at these processes over space and time at landscape scales to understand how herbivory seed dispersal interacts with changing climate and changing fire regimes to influence the state conditions of these ecosystems. And our data further shows that there's a trophic cascade from rodents that is changing soil resource availability. We're really interested in how this might create plant soil feedbacks through interactions with the microbial community. So yeah, this is kind of the first literature that I've seen that documents that rodents can potentially modify microbial communities that can change soil nutrient cycles that then potentially have plant soil feedbacks that could then really influence where we fall along this continuum of plant community assembly. And I think I'm done. I always give this plug for let's make science more social and more fun, but I don't think I need to make that plug here. You guys are like the poster people of how to do good science and have a good time at doing it. During COVID, I've always had a dream of publishing a science paper with my family. So we were at the Mojave Research Station where I have my sites, and it was COVID, so my students couldn't come down. And so I said, you guys, this is my family, it's my wife and my 5 children. You guys have to come and be my field crew this year, or we're gonna miss the 2021 data set, 2020 data set. So they came and they worked really hard. And I just was like, we're stuck here. It's great. We can go out and do hikes and have fun and eat, but I really want to publish a paper together. So I was running one day and I saw that these cow pies were creating an invasion hotspot. So I'd never seen red brome, at such high density and the seed head's so big. And I could see clearly that there was a hot spot around where cow pies were and where cow pies had disintegrated. There was a legacy effect. Or even 4 or 5 years after the cow pie had decomposed, it was still an invasion hotspot. And I also noticed that where they urinated also created these halos of invasion, these hotspots of invasion. So we went to work, we set up this experiment. Sam Lowry got in there, one of my undergraduate students, but other than that, it is the St.Clair family. And I think it officially was published just in the last month or two. And it makes me very happy that we were able to do that. My son Isaac is a statistician. He graduated in mathematics and statistics, so he ran the statistical analysis and produced the graphs. And all my other kids worked their hearts out to they each provided feedback on the manuscripts. Yeah, the writing is good, Dad. Even Daniel and Grace weighed in on it, so it was really fun. Here's some of the data, but I'm not going to go into it. So thanks for your attention. And I'd love, the reason I'm here is to see your experimental plots. Because it's been so enriching to see the experiments that are going and be able to talk. Like, tell me about this. Not by reading it through your written manuscript, but like, we're here, let's talk about it. I've had some really profound insights as I've done that. But also, like, here is my current thinking on this grant proposal I'm developing. It's getting close to having a first draft. But this section on the plant soil feedbacks and the soil processes, I'm still trying to work out. The plant functional traits is the other part I'm still trying to work out. So any insights you guys had as I shared these results, I would be really interested in hearing from you.
I have, because, we are mostly ornithologists. I'm ornithologist and entomologist here. I'm not too much into the plants, but I was thinking, because all these are being pollinated, or the natives are also dependent on some insect to pollinate them.
Yeah, we published a paper on that. There are different, so we were really interested, if you have these bigger fires, then of course you can conserve pollination services on the edge of the fire. But that's almost like island biogeography, right? You've got actually these patches of unburned vegetation within the larger burned out area. We're interested in, can it sustain pollinator communities and pollination services within these large, massive fires? And we found that, and we thought, wind pollinated species are probably fine, but what about the insect pollinated species? We found that in the Mojave Desert, it was still very resilient. The pollination services were resilient, even in these really large burned out areas, because of these islands of unburned vegetation. And we see that in post-fire conditions, the native shrubs, as they come back, they end up 4 to 5 times larger than shrubs in unburned area, probably because of competition release, and they produce way more flowers and provide more nectar rewards to support that pollinator community within the burned areas. So we think that
because of the nutrients being released through the fire.
So it's competition release, and you get a release of nutrients, so you get a fertilization effect essentially. If you look along a burn line, you'll see Lariat tridentata, which is the dominant shrub in the system, and it will be 4 to 5 times bigger than a shrub that's in the unburned area. You can just see them right next to each other. It's pretty remarkable.
I've been working in South Africa on the fire. For different fire regimes, and there we have seen something like that in the burnt areas. The whatever was growing there was bigger, and also had much higher load of insect. Because of the nutrients, I believe the whatever flushed after the fires was maybe more nutritious or slightly different.
Interesting.
So the insect was there heavily loaded than in the unburnt.
So cool. That's so cool. The other place that you can see it is on the edge of roads. So you go in the Sonoran Desert, the Mojave Desert, the Great Basin Desert, shrubs right along the road are 4 to 5 times bigger. You walk 5-10 meters back, they're much smaller. So that's another thing I'm really interested in is why are shrubs that grow along the edge of roads so much bigger? It's what in my classes, it's a hypothesis that I have my students think about. Why are they so much bigger right next to the road? Right? Do you have any thoughts on that? Why shrubs would be bigger next to roads than just 5 meters away from the road? And it's not a small difference. It's like shrubs that are way over my head, and then same species, I walk 5 meters and they're this tall.
Well, isn't it because the roots can go? I can't imagine the roads, but they're just the dusty roads, right? So
no, they're asphalt roads.
Asphalt roads.
Highway.
So water.
Water, good. Water. Yeah, competition release. You don't have any plants, so they can grow under the and the water infiltrates down underneath. So water, temperature differences. Yeah, that's a fun one to think about.
you witness any reversion of the state? So you talk about alternative stable states. Is the time of the observation enough to witness like a place changing from one to another?
Yeah, that's it. Again, in the Mojave, I'm waiting, I'm just being patient. And now because of the patience, at least in the Mojave, which is a more biodiverse native community, and the consumer community is more biodiverse as well. Right? It's more diversity in that system, which I think contributes to its resilience. But yeah, it's just in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen these native shrubs starting to pop back all over the place. It's like, okay, it may be more resilient. Maybe this is.
Oh, the fact also that you see patches, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's kind of whatever it is.
So if you just stick around for 4 or 5 years, you finish your grant, you publish the papers, what you're going to document is the invasion. Right? Because what's fast, what's responsive? Invasives, the non-natives. But it could be the system's completely resilient. You just have to wait long.
You also mentioned that you're already doing some modeling about this. Like I suppose it's like modeling like in a grid and a computer simulating something reaction diffusion.
Yes. So I have a collaborator that is an expert on this.
Yeah.
She's developed a model based on soil moisture. So it's a biophysical model.
Oh, what?
Yeah, it's called, it's based on soil moisture. These are integrating variables. So she's looking at the effects of fire. We're gonna put rodent data into the model so that we can scale up and really look and be even predictive, right? Project, like as we change these variables over time with an understanding that consumers are really important, fire is really important. Can we make projections?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because you can see already many interesting things in models that are much more simpler.
Yeah.
Like those studied by you said you were in the Netherlands, right? You said that Lining and probably Van der Koppel and
they've done some of that.
Done modelings that have the transition and then they put a space and you can see like different like spots or stripes or things like that. This is all done with far simpler models. That you just typically do trophic levels like most, but you have more. Right?
So it's a little bit more complex.
You want to have the plant soil feedback, which I did some modeling on that, and some models of plant soil feedback they can show also transitions or even produce cycles. And
did you publish that?
I was mostly analyzing a model from someone else called I can't remember the name.
If you have anything written up that you could share, I'd love to see it. Yeah. That's really what I need to know about is that kind of stuff. Yeah.
There's they have kind of something that's similar to alternative states, but there is a slow combination of a slow and a fast process that guarantees that you're going not to get stuck into one, you get eventually to the other. The problem is that you can spend very long time in each of the two states.
Right.
Like there is a cycle, but the cycle the periods can be so long that you're basically for practical purposes you're stuck into one condition.
Yeah, one thing we can do experimentally is actually flip the treatments. Right. But I want to give it more time to just see if the system, how it's going to respond. Right? I want to be patient with it. But at some point, I do anticipate switching the treatments as an experimental test of that state condition.
But also the thing about the climate that with the climate change, we don't just have trends, but we have these crazy fluctuations, these things. And when you have this toy model of the basins, and you don't have enough resilience, right? I mean, each state has its own resilience, but if you are pushing it frequently, right? Even if you have high resilience, you don't let the system like really come back until you drop it to the other side, right?
Yeah, it'd be cool to think about that. I mean, the two variables that are widespread, like the most important in our system at the landscape scale is fire and drought. We think those are the real drivers, and precipitation timing. Right? That fall pulse of precipitation really tipped the system. at least it promoted more invasion, more fire in the system. So, yeah, I mean, doing some subplot work to kind of look at pushing the system a little bit more could be really interesting.
Yeah.
Thinking about other variables that may play into that, I think would be really, really.
And
Yeah.
is there something else what eats these seeds during the day? Because what other animals are there?
Well, you're an ornithologist, right? So what do you think?
Like with imaging, like during the day, there must be some grassland birds who are
Yeah.
feeding on the seeds.
I've never noticed, like I have no ants. Ants are really important. So ants, yes.
Yes.
We are just getting ready to publish a paper on ants,
Mhm.
looking at the competitive interactions between rodents and ants. If I can pull this up really quickly. Yeah, if you're an entomologist, then this is. Okay. So these are ant mounds. These are harvester ants.
Oh.
And ecologically, they're hugely important.
The appearance are.
Yes. So here's the mound itself,
Yeah.
and then they clear the vegetation, right? So they'll go out and if any seedling comes up, they'll just go and cut it down. You can see it's like someone going out and harvesting trees,
Yeah.
just go out and clip it.
They also concentrate.
Yeah.
Seeds,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
But do they concentrate them somewhere so you can see that they grow the seeds after that? Or
We started some of those experiments and my student left and didn't finish it. So that's something we're still wanting to do, are some manipulation experiments to look at the top-down effects of the rodents on the plant communities. Of course, within these areas, it's hugely important. But what we found is that when you burn has a positive effect on the ants. And rodent presence has a negative effect, has a competitive effect. And there's an interaction there that's actually pretty interesting. That's what we're publishing on right now. My students just finishing the response to reviews. I actually need to look at that tonight and send it back. So it should be published within the next couple of months. But it is another one where if you're not paying attention to these consumers, these are also ecosystem engineers and hugely important. We've known that, and we're starting a series of experiments to really look at the ants. And I love pollination biology, so I'd really love to get more into that. In terms of birds, I've really thought about birds more from the perspective of predation on rodents. Than seed-eating birds. And it may just be ignorance on my part. Observationally, I haven't seen a lot of birds out there in our experimental plots flying around at all. But I go to other systems, other places. I'm really aware like birds as herbivores are really, really important. But it seems to be less so in our system.
Mhm.
In your system, are they driving a lot of vegetation dynamics?
they do.
Yeah.
They do, like, but it really depends. I have been working on the study sites where everything was run by ants.
Hmm.
And in the systems where the birds were causing the highest effect,
Interesting.
yeah, but I do mostly like the insectivorous birds and the insect interactions
So
rather
cool.
than
Love that stuff.
like dispersal of the seeds by birds, but yeah, there are regions where the birds eat a lot
Huh.
of seeds.
Our systems is dominated by the rodents and ants have huge, I would say, a second in the system, really, really important. I did submit a proposal to experimentally manipulate the ants in combination with everything else, and that didn't get funded, unfortunately. So I was really interested in that question and just quantifying what impact the ants are having in the system, but didn't get funded, so.
I had a question.
Yeah.
In the beginning, you were showing this picture with the stages of the desert and like with too much fire.
Yeah.
Like leading basically to the barren landscape and the not enough fire leading to the woodland formation.
Yeah.
So as you said, like too much fire basically is because of the added fuel of invasives. And if you have too little fire, how is that caused? Is it suppressed by humans or?
Yes. There's a couple mechanisms that so I do a lot of research in mixed deciduous coniferous forests. where our mascot in the United States, Smokey the Bear, I don't know if you guys know Smokey the Bear, has created a lot of propaganda about how bad forest fires are, which all of our research shows is absolutely not true. It's fire suppression that's the problem. So I have this split personality. I'm trying to push Smokey the Bear into the deserts. What I'm trying to do, less fires in deserts, more fires in our forest systems. But yeah, that's exactly what's going on right here. And it's fire suppression by actively putting out fires. Invasives and fuel continuity is also, so cheatgrass is up in here as well, and it's helping spread fire. But really the advancement, a lot of it's been driven by grazing. All right, so we have literally millions of sheep, cattle. We're managing wildlife in a different way than we ever have historically. And that's caused a lot of the understory species and abundance, the fuel of the understory species to be lost. So then fires aren't being carried, and that allows these fire prone tree species to successfully establish. So I think a lot of it's been because of grazing management that we've created fewer fires at higher elevations. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have a question also, like not a question, but can I say something?
Sure. Sorry.
Yeah. Hello. Is it okay now?
Yes, okay.
Yeah, I'll even put my camera on, I guess. Yeah, it was really nice to hear you, and thank you for the presentation. Also, like I studied spiders. I reminded a paper about fire events, but not in North America, in South America, and about interactions of bromeliads plants with some species of jumping spider. And they actually figured out that they have both benefits from each other. Like spiders can survive the events of fire inside of this plant because of their leaf structure. And also spiders provides nutrients and like all the stuff to the plants, which makes them stronger than the plants without it, or growing faster a little bit and so on. So I just wanted to share this information. I don't know if you need it or not, but not about like I just wanted to say that a lot of interesting things which we can study in that field of interaction with different species. Yeah.
Very cool. Did you say the bromeliads? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Very cool. Those are such interesting plants.
Yeah, that's true. I know that they cause also flame of like heart of flame. Yeah, in Brazil.
And then, so the spiders seek refuge during fires within the bromeliads, is what you're saying?
They survived usually inside in the center of this plant because of leaf structure when like fire happens. Yeah,
that's so cool.
So it's kind of like it's not mutualism, of course, but it's interesting interaction. Like they both are having some benefits to each other, giving some benefits.
Yeah, it really reminds me of the acacia ant mutualism in the savannah. And I was just down in Kenya at the Klee experiment and learned that during fires, so these ants are hosted by the acacias, and then if elephants or giraffes try to eat the plant, they'll attack it, and it's very effective defense strategy.
Yeah.
But I discovered that during fires, the ants will go down and seek refuge in underground nests, and the elephants and the giraffes have figured that out, and so right after a fire, they'll go and they'll eat the acacias because they know the ants aren't there. So cool. Hey, thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Okay. Bye, people online.